When the judge looked up from his papers, I already knew I'd lost. Not because I was guilty, but because the man sitting across the courtroom was my father. He didn't flinch when our eyes met. Not even a hint of regret. Just the same cold stare he gave me 15 years ago, the day he walked out after my mother's funeral, the day he decided grief was my fault. Now he was back dressed in the same arrogance that used to fill our house, telling the court that I'd stolen everything he ever built. The irony, the only thing he ever built, was the wall between us. I swallowed hard as the judge, his old friend, nodded along. For them, this was routine. For me, it was a rerun of the same betrayal I'd been living in silence since I was 17. My name is Jessica Davis, and this time I wasn't going to stay silent. Snow blurred the skyline of Denver that morning, coating the city in a silence too clean to be trusted. From the 21st floor, the windows of my office turned the storm into glass, a perfect illusion of peace, until my phone rang. The call came from the Denver County Court. A few minutes later, an email followed. The subject line cut through the screen like a blade, notice of petition to contest. Will filed by Robert Davis. My hands went cold before I even opened it. Robert Davis, my father, the man who once shaped laws and shattered families with the same precision. The man who walked away when I was 17 and never looked back. He'd built his career preaching justice. Now he was using it as a weapon. The petition claimed I was unfit to manage the inheritance my grandmother left me. It wasn't about money, it was about power, about control, about rewriting a history he'd abandoned. Later that day, I went to the courthouse to file my response. The wooden hall smelled of polish and old paper. Then I saw him. Silver hair, immaculate suit expression carved from stone. He didn't greet me. He didn't have to. You can still keep your dignity, he said flatly. Withdraw now. I met his gaze. I have my own version of dignity, and it doesn't require your approval. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne and the same emptiness he'd left in my life. When I opened the official file later that night, my stomach tightened again. The petition carried not just his name, but the witness signature of Judge Alan Pierce, his old friend. The same man from that photograph on my grandmother's mantel, smiling beside him years ago. The pattern was clear. The pieces were already in motion. And somewhere deep down, I knew my grandmother had seen this coming long before I did. The road to Estes Park was quiet that morning, the mountains still half asleep under a layer of frost. When I reached my grandmother's cabin by the lake, the air carried the same scent of pine and turpentine she used when painting. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, pale and cold, touching the old wooden mailbox that had her initials carved on it. Inside, dust clung to everything. The silence felt almost sacred. The lawyer had said she left something for me, a letter. I found it behind a stack of family albums in her safe, a yellow envelope sealed tight, my name written in her looping hand. Her voice came back to me as I read. If you're holding this, it means Robert has returned. Don't let fear rob you of what's right. Real justice doesn't come from a gavel. It comes from the heart that dares to speak when silence feels safer. My hands trembled when I saw what was beneath it, a copy of her will. An unpublished version I'd never seen. There, tucked neatly into the final page, was a single paragraph labeled Ethical Clause. If the petitioner is proven to have violated honesty or engaged in bribery, the entirety of the estate shall transfer to the charitable fund overseen by Jessica Davis. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She had anticipated this, every manipulation, every betrayal. She hadn't just written a will. She'd left a trap wrapped in righteousness. I pulled open the bottom drawer of her desk, and a photograph slipped out, a younger Eleanor smiling beside a silver-haired man. Alan Pierce, my father's oldest friend. On the back, written in her careful cursive, for Robert's old friend with love. I stared at it for a long time. She had known exactly who he was, and yet she'd built her plan around him. My grandmother hadn't simply trusted the law. She'd turned it into a weapon for truth. She didn't just leave me an inheritance, she left me a roadmap to justice. The marble halls of the federal courthouse in Denver echoed with footsteps and cameras. The first hearing to validate my grandmother's will was already drawing attention. The press whispered my father's name like it carried moral weight, like the world had forgotten what he'd done to earn it. Then he walked in with his lawyer, Victor Lang. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, but I knew that face. He'd once been the CFO of Davis Foundation until my grandmother discovered he'd redirected scholarship funds into his own accounts. She'd fired him publicly, telling me afterward, "Remember that man, Jessica? He sells integrity to the highest bidder." And there he was again now, defending the man who'd raised him up after she tore him down. The hearing began. Judge Alan Pierce entered with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He greeted me with a polite smile, his tone smooth and polished. "Ms. Davis, I trust we'll find the truth together." But the way his eyes swept past me said otherwise. As proceedings continued, I realized this wasn't a courtroom, it was theater. My father played the role of the concerned patriarch. Pierce played the impartial judge. And me, I was the villain of their script, the greedy daughter, standing trial for a crime she didn't commit. When it ended, I gathered my things, trying to steady my breathing. Behind me, two voices carried softly down the corridor, Pierce and my father. "This will be quick, Robert. Old time's sake." The words froze me mid-step. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, brushing against the envelope from Estes Park. I thought of my grandmother's handwriting, the line she'd left for me. "When you hear the words, 'old times' sake,' you'll know justice is being sold." I turned toward the door, the world narrowing to the sound of my own pulse. They thought they'd written the ending to this story, but they didn't know she'd already scripted a different one through me. 3 weeks after the first hearing, the Denver federal courthouse looked less like a house of law and more like a stage. Reporters packed every corridor, microphones flashing like bayonets, their headlines already written, "The Daughter versus the Judge." I arrived with a temporary attorney, a timid young man who fumbled his briefcase twice before we even passed security. My father moved through the chaos as though he owned it, smiling, waving, shaking hands, soaking in the spotlight. He looked less like a man on trial and more like a man being honored. Inside the courtroom, Victor Lang delivered his performance flawlessly. His voice carried confidence, every word dipped in feigned righteousness. My client, the Honorable Robert Davis, only wishes to protect his mother's legacy from mismanagement. Ms. Davis has shown instability and poor judgment in her handling of funds. Each sentence landed like a nail hammered into my reputation. Cameras snapped, reporters scribbled. By the next morning, I was front-page news. Financial advisor Jessica Davis, accused of elder fraud. My father's face accompanied every headline bathed in sympathy and moral light. That night, as I scrolled through the endless stream of accusations, an email appeared. No subject line. One sentence, "Check the IP before you defend yourself." I did. The source traced back to the Denver federal court, specifically the internal server belonging to Judge Alan Pierce's chambers. My stomach clenched. The same man who claimed impartiality had fed the press their narrative. Justice wasn't blind, it was owned. I filed a motion to have him removed. Within hours, it was denied. The signature at the bottom, Alan Pierce. An old colleague from the Financial Ethics Association sent me a file from 2004. Judge Pierce cleared of bribery charges thanks to the intervention of federal prosecutor Robert Davis. 20 years of loyalty, 20 years of debt. Later that evening, my father appeared on national television, voice calm and practiced. "I only wish to protect my mother's estate. My daughter simply doesn't understand the honor of the Davis name." The anchor nodded as if truth itself had spoken. For the audience, I was no longer a daughter, but a warning. Watching his performance, I realized something important. If he wanted a war fought with reputation, then truth would be my weapon. If they wanted me to be the villain, I'd give them a story where the villain wins. The cafe in downtown Denver smelled like burnt espresso and cold rain. Lena Brooks sat in the corner booth, red hair pulled back, recorder on the table. She'd once exposed the judges for sale scandal. She didn't need introductions. I told her everything, Pierce Lang, the falsified evidence, the emails. When I finished, she leaned forward. "You sure you want your father's name printed?" "If that's what it takes to keep my grandmother's promise, yes." Her lips curved slightly. "Then I'll find Pierce's trail, but if you're lying, you'll ruin us both." "I'm not the liar here," I said. "They are." Days later, she texted, "Found something. Same $25,000 transfer every year. RD Consulting LLC to Judicial Retiree Fund. RD Robert Davis." The name alone made my skin prickle. He'd been paying Pierce for years, laundering bribes as donations. At a fundraising dinner, Lena posed as a local reporter and snapped a photo. Pierce and my father clinking glasses, their smiles smug and certain. The next morning, Pierce sneered in court. "Ms. Davis, the media attention you've attracted won't save you here." I met his gaze. "I don't need the media, Your Honor. I have something better, the truth." His smirk faltered, and in that instant, I knew his empire had begun to crack. The deposition room in Denver's federal court was lit by a single strip of cold fluorescent light that made everything look sterile, even the truth. My father sat across the metal table, posture straight, calm, perfectly composed. Victor Lang adjusted his cufflinks like he was about to perform, not question. Judge Pierce stood at the corner, pretending objectivity, his eyes already carrying judgment. Lang's voice dripped with false civility. "Ms. Davis, did you oversee the Davis Foundation Scholarship Fund?" "Yes," I said evenly. "As financial supervisor. And did you withdraw $350,000 into your personal account?" "No. That was a reinvestment approved by the board." He smiled thinly and slid a stack of documents toward me. My signature forged to perfection. My throat tightened, but I stayed silent. When the digital timestamp appeared 3 a.m., on a night I'd been giving a keynote in New York, I spoke calmly. "I can prove I wasn't even in this state." Pierce cut in sharp as a gavel. "Ms. Davis, this isn't a technical hearing." "Answer directly." "I will, Your Honor," I replied, "when this court is ready to hear the kind of truth that isn't for sale." The silence was suffocating. During recess, I stepped into the hallway and caught Pierce's voice. "Just stay calm, Robert. We'll freeze her accounts by next week." He didn't see my phone recording. That night, I sat with Lena in her car, under the rain, the recording playing between us. "If I release this, they'll deny it," she warned. "Then give me a way to make them deny it in public." She grinned. "Now we have a plan." Days later, Lena interviewed Pierce for a puff piece about restoring public trust. When she asked if he'd attended any fundraisers with Robert Davis, he laughed. Pure coincidence. His denial, caught on camera, was exactly what we needed, their lie immortalized by their own pride. Rain still fell over Denver when I drove to my grandmother's old office. The air smelled of paper, cedar, and memory. Her silver pen rested on the desk, the one she'd used to sign her first donation check. I touched it gently, hearing her voice again. "Justice doesn't need a hammer. It needs a keeper." I reopened her will, reading line by line until I found it, a faint handwritten clause on page 7. "If the petitioner engages in bribery or dishonesty, all assets transfer to the Eleanor Scholarship Fund." My chest tightened. She'd seen this coming. I sent a photo to Carla Monroe. Her reply came fast. "It's valid. If we prove bribery, Robert loses everything." Minutes later, Lena's message buzzed through source inside FBI. "Bank record attached." The screenshot glowed in the dark. $25,000 wired from RD Consulting LLC to the Judicial Retiree Fund the same day. Pierce froze my accounts. The pattern was flawless. Carla filed the motion to recuse Pierce, attaching the documents and recording. "If he won't step down, we'll make sure the world watches him fall," she said. Before the hearing, Lena published an anonymous exposé, "Is Denver's Justice System for Sale?" The court buckled under public pressure, announcing an open session. That night, I sat in candlelight, pen in hand, and wrote, "Tomorrow, I'll hold justice steady as you taught me." Wax dripped, burning away everything except one word: truth. I smiled. That was enough. The Denver federal court was packed to the walls, every seat filled, cameras flashing like lightning. The public hearing had drawn the entire city's attention after Lena's article broke overnight. On the front row sat Robert Davis, Judge Alan Pierce, and Victor Lang, 3 men who'd built a fortress out of reputation and deception. I sat beside Carla Monroe, strangely calm. Pierce entered, robe crisp, gavel striking once. "The court will now continue Davis versus Davis regarding the contested will of Eleanor Davis." Carla leaned close, whispering, "Ready?" I nodded. I've been waiting for this since I read her letter. Lang began with the ease of a showman. "My client, the Honorable Robert Davis, merely seeks to protect his late mother's estate from mismanagement. Ms. Davis, though intelligent, has shown instability and reckless financial behavior." His finger pointed toward me. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled like stenographers at a spectacle. When Carla rose to counter, Pierce interrupted every few sentences. "Counsel, keep it relevant." "Objection sustained." His voice dripped with control. My father turned to me, the faintest smile curling his lips. "End of game," he mouthed. Then Carla stood abruptly. "Your Honor, before any new evidence is submitted, my client requests to raise an ethical concern before this court." Pierce frowned. "Proceed briefly." I walked to the witness stand, file in hand. My heartbeat was steady, each step a reckoning. My voice carried through the room. "Before we continue, I'd like to remind this court that the law does not belong to friendships or to debts from 20 years ago." I opened the folder and laid out the pieces one by one. A photo of Pierce and my father at the 2015 fundraising gala. Another from the Judicial Fund event in 2019. A wire transfer receipt, $25,000 from ERD Consulting to the Judicial Fund managed by Pierce. And finally, the audio clip. "Just stay calm, Robert. We'll freeze her accounts by next week." The room froze. Pierce's face drained of color. Even the sound of cameras stopped for a breath. Carla stepped forward. "This evidence has been submitted to the Department of Justice as of this morning." Pierce's hand trembled as he lifted the gavel. "We will not proceed further. Case dismissed." He stood, abandoning decorum, and walked out pale as marble. The crowd erupted. Reporters lunged for the exits, phones already dialing. I remained still. My father's voice cracked beside me. "What have you done?" I turned to him, steady quiet. "Exactly what you taught me, use the law. Only this time, rightfully." The flashbulbs ignited again, but this time the light didn't burn. It exposed. 3 days after the verdict, the story had consumed every headline in America. Federal judge resigns, amid bribery scandal, Davis family at the center. The photos of Pierce walking out of the courthouse, pale and trembling, looped endlessly on cable news. He released a short statement citing health reasons. No one believed him. The Department of Justice confirmed they were reviewing financial misconduct within the Denver circuit. By noon, the Bar Association announced that Victor Lang's license had been revoked for submitting falsified evidence. And my father, Robert Davis, was stripped of every honorary title, every board seat, every lingering trace of his old prestige. The FBI had opened a full investigation. When they called me in to give my final statement, I expected the usual bureaucracy. Instead, they led me into a stark interrogation room, metal table, single light air cold enough to sting. My father sat across from me. No tailored suit, no defiance in his posture. Just a man whose arrogance had finally collapsed under its own weight. His voice rasped across the room. "You destroyed everything I built." I met his eyes calm. "No, you destroyed what you built. I only took back what was never yours." He slammed his hand on the table, anger cracking through fatigue. "I did it to protect the Davis name." I leaned forward, quiet but sharp. "Honor isn't something you protect with dirty hands." For a long moment he said nothing. The light caught his face, showing the hollowness beneath the pride. No tears, no rage, just silence. It was the first time in my life he had nothing left to argue. The judge had gone pale, and my father had gone silent. When the interview ended, a federal agent held the door for me. "Ms. Davis, the department appreciates your cooperation." I paused at the threshold. "I didn't do it for them," I said softly. "I did it for her." As I stepped into the corridor, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting through the gray. For a fleeting moment, I could almost see her Eleanor Davis standing at the end of the hall, smiling faintly the way she did whenever justice had finally come home. A year later, the past felt like a distant courtroom echo. The auditorium at the University of Denver shimmered beneath soft lights, rows of faces watching as I stepped onto the stage. The banner behind me read Ethics in Wealth Management. I looked out at the audience, students, professors, lawyers, and said, "Wealth doesn't make us who we are. What we protect when no one's watching, that's what defines family." A hush fell over the room. My grandmother taught me that justice isn't about winning. It's about staying honest when it hurts. Applause rose like a tide. On the screen behind me, a photo of Eleanor appeared, the words beneath it glowing, "Justice is not law. It's love disciplined by truth." That evening, I drove back to Estes Park. The lake house had become the headquarters of the Eleanor Project, a scholarship foundation for law students who still believed in integrity. In the living room, I placed her silver fountain pen inside a glass case. My daughter ran in, pointing to a portrait on the wall. "Mom, who's that lady?" I smiled. "She's the reason you'll never have to doubt what's right." Later, the mail arrived, a small envelope, no return address. Inside was an old newspaper, "Judge Davis indicted." Someone had circled a line beneath it, "Justice finds its way eventually." The paper smelled faintly of her perfume. I stepped onto the porch as the wind carried lavender through the air. The sun glimmered across the lake, bright and unflinching. I whispered, "Justice doesn't whisper anymore, Grandma. It speaks through me."